and welcome to this episode of the Mandy Meyer Podcast. As per usual, this is the podcast where we chat all about getting healthier, getting fitter, getting stronger, and losing a little bit of fat in the process. In today's episode, I'm going to be discussing consistency, or maybe even the lack thereof, but more so consistency and how do you stay consistent? Because I think that's the biggest struggle for a lot of people, but we need to be able to identify what is the thing that is breaking your consistency in the first place. Because once you can identify that, you can then work on creating more consistency. And I mean, come on, we know what they all say. And by all, I mean, even me, consistency is key. And without consistency, progress is going to struggle to come your way. Now, I'm going to start this episode off with calling a spade a spade. Oh, there's no surprise there, Mandy. Your biggest or the biggest thing that affects a person's level of consistency, meaning the thing that stops you from proceeding as per normal, would be that number on the scale. Because most people will get on that scale and there'll be a fluctuation and you'll be like, oh, screw this. The number has increased by 1.234 grams. And immediately, because you see an increase in the number on the scale, you're like, oh, what is the point of continuing anyway? And the moment you have that mindset around that number on the scale, think about it realistically. That is the thing that actually affects your consistency, because now all of a sudden you've stood on that scale and it's increased slightly. There's been a weight fluctuation. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, there's a weight fluctuation, so, I'm not even going to focus on the nutrient density of my meals. I'm not even going to drink my water. What's the point of actually hitting my step targets today? Because I'm doing everything according to plan, but yet the number on the scale is fluctuating. And the more you have that mindset, the more that is going to affect your behaviors after you get on that scale in the morning. So that is the mindset that you need to work on changing to help improve your levels of consistency. You cannot, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, you cannot let that number on the scale, every single little time it fluctuates, you cannot let that number on the scale throw you off track, okay? For the lack of better words, off track. You cannot do that because realistically, that number on the scale is going to fluctuate. It doesn't matter if you've got 5 kilograms to lose or if you have 30 kilograms to lose. Maybe you've got 1 kilogram to lose. There are going to be fluctuations. And the moment you accept that, now I say this knowing that seeing a fluctuation is not easy. It's not easy at all, especially if you have been ticking the boxes and you have been grafting your ass off and all of a sudden you get on that scale and there's a fluctuation. Seeing that fluctuation is not easy. I know that. But the one thing I want you not to do is let that fluctuation affect your next move. Because the moment you let that fluctuation affect your next move, okay, you may have planned your nutrient-dense lunch, but as soon as you see there's a fluctuation on the scale, what do? You then say, you know what, screw that nutrient-dense lunch, and all of a sudden, what do then? You're like, oh, well, I've got a packet of peanut M&Ms in the cupboard. Now, all of a sudden, your nutrient-dense lunch doesn't matter. You're like, well, it is what it is because that number's already fluctuated. That's where you grab that packet of peanut M&Ms, for example, and you consume that. The moment you consume that fun food or the snacks that were in your cupboard, that's often where that spiral takes place, right? And that's all because of that mindset around that number on the scale. The moment you start understanding where weight fluctuations are stemming from and accepting the fact that weight fluctuations are normal, that's the moment you can start working on the changed mindset. Now, what I will say is that fat loss can take place without weighing yourself. I know, shock and horror, who would have ever thought? And if not weighing yourself helps you with your levels of consistency, then rather pack that scale away. Because think to yourself, every time you see a fluctuation, what is your next move? Is it part of the plan? Isn't it part of the plan? If that number on the scale is the reason that your consistency is not up there or on point, then rather look at not weighing yourself for a full month. Because by not weighing yourself and not seeing those fluctuations, it doesn't take up mental space. You've got so much more mental space to focus on your daily non-negotiables, to focus on all other areas of progress. I place emphasis on all other areas of progress, because now you're not humming and hawing and pussyfooting around that little fucking number on the scale. And that number on the scale, because you're not weighing yourself for a month, that number on the scale is not going to get in the way of you ticking your boxes, of you smashing your other non-negotiables. So immediately what's going to happen then is, you can see where I'm going with this, like your levels of consistency are just going to improve and improve, and it's going to skyrocket, because now you don't have that little gremlin, for the lack of better words, like the whole time, like, oh, you've done something wrong, you've done something wrong, you've done something wrong. No, because now there's no scale, there's no fluctuations. You've got the power to create consistency with all your other non-negotiables. And I can tell you now, when you put your mind to smashing those non-negotiables without the influence of that number on the scale, it's really going to help you progress a lot more than what you know. Another great way to work on your consistency, and hear me out here, right, is to go online and find a consistency calendar. Whether it's a 30-day consistency calendar, whether it's a 60-day consistency calendar, maybe it's a 90-day consistency calendar. Print a calendar off with 30-day blocks on it, or blocks for 60 days, and tick those damn days off. Put it on your fridge and tick those days off, because when you have a visual of the boxes ticked, your consistency boxes, when you have a visual of what is being ticked, immediately you start looking at the bigger picture, okay? Now you're like, okay, I've ticked 4 days. That's 4 days out of the 7 days so far. That immediately gives you that oomph and that vooma and that want, that will to tick the next couple of days, okay? Now I'm a very visual person, and I know a lot of other people out there are exactly the same. So what has really helped me in the past is printing a consistency calendar. Mine was for 90 days, setting a goal for those 90 days. And usually what I would do is identify the areas that I'm lacking consistency in. Then I would print a consistency calendar for each one of those areas. I would never have more than 3 areas though, because it just becomes so overwhelming. Let's say, for example, you're lacking consistency within your steps. Print a consistency calendar for 90 days for your step targets. If you're lacking consistency within, say, your calories, for example, print a damn consistency calendar and stick it on your fridge. Because the moment you see those boxes being ticked, that's where you realize you're like, I've got this. I've absolutely got this. I've absolutely got this, right? But if you don't have that visual calendar in front of you, you're like, well, I don't know how many days I've been consistent for. I don't know how many days I haven't been consistent for. So yeah, one day here and there, it's not really going to matter. You look at the end of the day and there's no consistency taking place. Whereas at least if you can see it, if you can see that calendar on your fridge, you will then be able to see the amount of days that you have already been consistent. And that is a game changer. When you can see it, when you can visualize it, it gives you that motivation to want to tick more boxes, okay? Now, I know you're probably thinking like, oh, but Mandy, we're not 7 years old. Why must we print these things off? We work with apps. Try it. Trust me, just try it. Print off a consistency calendar. Don't overthink it. Don't overthink it. Any consistency calendar that you can find online. Print it off, write down what your goal is, so what you want to focus on when it comes to your consistency, stick it on the fridge and tick off the days that you are smashing those goals. You will see what a game changer it is. Take my word for it. The next thing that affects people's consistency is when you think you are having something that is not meant to be part of the plan, or if you have a high calorie day. Immediately what happens then is, let's say for example today I didn't plan to have a chocolate, and all of a sudden a chocolate just fell into my lap and I opened it and I ate it. Immediately, because it wasn't intentional, what a lot of people might do is start feeling guilty about it. And the moment you have a food that you said is not allowed to be within your plan and you've restricted those foods, often you then tell yourself you've failed, you feel guilty about it, and you're like, oh, well, I've already eaten one chocolate, so I can just as well not stick to the plan for the rest of the week or the next year, for example. Mandy, don't be so dramatic. I'm not. These things happen. Or what could happen is maybe, just maybe, you have a higher calorie day. If you're tracking your calories, maybe you go over calories by 200 or 300, maybe 400 calories. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, I've already gone over calories. So what is the point of focusing on my calories for the rest of the day or maybe for the rest of the weekend? And what does that do? That immediately breaks your consistency. That breaks the power of momentum because you've got that mindset of, I've done something wrong, so why proceed with doing good, for example, right? So again, your superpower to creating consistency is going to be proceeding as per normal. Let's say, for example, you don't hit step targets today. Okay, and you've got a step target of 8,000 steps per day. Now today you hit 5,000 steps. You then tell yourself, oh, well, I've hit 5,000 steps today, so there's no point of me aiming for 8,000 steps tomorrow, or let's just call it a day. No, you need to look at your weekly averages as well. Because when you look at your weekly averages, that's where you realize, okay, maybe one higher calorie day or one day that was a little bit lower in steps, maybe that was there and maybe it wasn't intentional. But when you start looking at your weekly averages, you realize that it's all about your weekly averages. So maybe one day lower in step targets, maybe the other 6 days you went over your step targets, and together for the 7 days, boom, you're on target with your steps. Same with your calories. Another thing that stands in the way of you creating consistency is the fact that you feel like you're not seeing any progress. And again, that brings me back to that number on the scale. Oftentimes that number on the scale will stagnate, maybe for a week, maybe for 2 weeks, maybe for 3 weeks. It just really depends. But again, you need to be open to the idea of actually looking at all areas of progress. So maybe that number on the scale doesn't move. That doesn't mean you give up. That doesn't mean you give up for a day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. You continue working on consistency, because I always say success is just around the corner. You don't know what corner it's around though. And most often, more likely than not, people give up just before they're about to go around that corner and reach success. So again, don't let the small little things throw you off track. Don't lose the wheels of the wagon because you didn't hit step targets today. Don't give up so easy. Don't break that power of momentum because you had one chocolate. And maybe even you had a raucous weekend. Maybe you were dancing on the bar tables after one too many tequilas. Maybe you've got a little bit of bang babalas. I don't even know what that is in English. Maybe you feel a little bit guilt. Maybe there's, I don't know what, I don't even know what it is, right? But again, you don't throw away a week or 2 weeks or a couple of days because of one little thing that took place that wasn't part of the plan. Okay, and I think that is, everyone's like, how do I work on my consistency? How do I work on my consistency? Proceed as per normal. If you have one higher calorie day, proceed as per normal. If you have a chocolate that wasn't part of the plan, proceed as per normal. Okay, that is going to be the biggest mindset shift. There is not one food that is inherently bad for fat loss. There's not one food that is inherently good for fat loss. You can incorporate these things into your plan in a calorie controlled manner without feeling guilty about it. And that is the most important thing to remember. Another thing is, a lot of people, their consistency, there's a lack of consistency because they feel they've only got X amount of time to reach certain goals. And when you feel you are not en route within that certain time frame to reach those goals, that's often where you start feeling like, what's the point of doing this anyway? You need to remind yourself that this is a lifelong expedition. These are lifelong habits that you are creating. The habits that you are creating now in your health and fat loss expedition, they are not only now. You're going to wake up every single day for the rest of your life and practice these habits, okay? So there's always going to be ups, there's always going to be downs. It's not always going to be perfect, but you cannot let every single little speed bump on your health and fat loss expedition turn into a roadblock. Because remember, you're doing this for the rest of your life. It's not a quick fix challenge. And if you have 1 or 2 days over calories, it's not going to ruin your progress. It's that mindset shift that you have to start working on when it comes to all of this that you are doing. Another thing, before I forget, something that I just thought of now that could also be affecting your consistency is maybe you have set your goals way too high. And by that, I mean your daily non-negotiables. Maybe, for example, you were currently on 3,000 steps per day, and now you've set your step targets to 10,000 steps per day. That's a jump of 7,000 steps per day that you want to do. That can be quite overwhelming, that can be daunting, and it can definitely, most definitely be very, very challenging. Now, what could potentially be happening is because it's so out of your reach, you're not reaching it because it's too difficult to reach it. And immediately you feel bad for not hitting those step targets. So why don't you look at what you're currently doing, say for steps, for an example. It can be for anything. I just use steps as an example. Use your current steps as a benchmark to set your goals. So if you're currently on 3,000 steps per day, set your step target at 4,000 steps per day so that you can gradually increase or improve that area and that habit, okay? Again, changes don't take place overnight. You're not magically going to wake up tomorrow morning and be smashing 50,000 steps per day. That was very dramatic, Mandy, I know. You're not magically going to wake up tomorrow morning and everything's just changed. It takes time, it takes patience, it takes hard work, and it really does take that you are consistent. So figure out what is stopping you from being consistent, or what is causing, I want to say, chaos within your consistency. Identify those areas, get yourself a consistency calendar, stick it on the fridge, and then if you have a day that doesn't go according to plan, proceed as per normal. On that note, I'm going to love and leave you like I usually do. Keep smiling, keep laughing, and keep being kind to one another. Much love, your friend who also still sometimes struggles with consistency, but proceeds as per normal, Mandy.